Um, it's now 4:31 Sunday. I've been spending most of my day listening to Dharma teachings, I suppose. Facing the Wall, Bodhidharma, chap who went from India to China. Just spent a little while meditating. And it seems to me that there's a couple of things I'd like to try to do. And I might look back at this video in the future and think, I think we can get a bit more precise about what we meditate upon. So it's related to the idea of triangulation. What I do in mathematics when I teach kids is you try to ascertain this principle, this principle, this principle, you do them simultaneously, or this thing, this thing, this thing, you do those simultaneously, and that gives rise to an emergent kind of thought concept. Similarly, okay, so here's an example. I've had these kinds of images in my head over years now, and I keep on sort of returning back to them. So if you could put these in your head and kind of meditate, just see what these three things, how are these three related? You got the letter I, small, not the capital I, just the small letter I, and you know, it's just a little stroke and a dot on the top. Okay, and that dot is called a tittle. Right, so you've got that. That's one thing. Then you've got, and I can imagine us representing this visually, so you could, instead of doing this thing, which is just be talking, you could actually have these images, and so you say, right, meditate on these three, the kind of images that you have to hold in your mind, kind of thoughts, and the associations relating to them. So, small I, letter I, line, tittle. Then I've got a standing wave, where you have a frequency which maintains itself, and instead of if it has a certain frequency, it holds its shape. So for example, if you put, I think you see this on YouTube, where you get sand and you put it on a 2D plate of metal and you vibrate the plate, the sand shakes and then it forms certain shapes depending on the frequency. Or for example, using a liquidizer, as I've been making smoothies, and you do a little liquidizing thing, and at certain frequencies, when you lift up the liquidizer up to the surface of the liquid vibrates to the extent where it holds a shape. It holds a certain, you see all of the waves, but they're not moving, they're just vibrating and holding the position. Okay, you got that, standing waves. Okay, I don't know if you combine those two, you might get something interesting. And the third is surfing. And the moment, and I've only had, honestly, less than a second, maybe a second, feeling of this, where I felt the wave. And normally, I haven't done this enough, I fall off, alright, very quickly, because I'm too close to the front. And it was David who was teaching me, who noticed that I was standing too close to the front, and told me to sort of like stand back a bit on the board. And when I did that, honestly, the next wave, I kind of like stood back, even though it didn't feel right, and I felt the wave, and it felt comfortable. Obviously, if I stood too far back, I'd lose the wave would go forwards, and I'd be on the back end of the wave, and suddenly I wouldn't be surfing anymore. Okay, but it's not that you're on the front, you're kind of settling the board, your weight into the wave, so that you're really at a certain point. space-time with a wave. Interesting sensation, and I think that's the thing to go for. Okay, maybe a fourth thing. I've had this, maybe it's a combination of these. So meditate on those. Okay, if you meditate on those, maybe something interesting is going to occur in your head. Right? Right, just really, but just focus, try and keep on those three things. There's a kind of fourth thing, but I don't know if it's a combination of these. Somewhere in there. I think it's consciousness. Time and space. And there's a couple of things that have informed me regarding, a Dzogchen book, which I've kind of like looked at for years and years. And I've only looked at a few texts, Zen texts, Introduction to Zen. Not being particularly sophisticated. And for some reason that's kind of helped model my idea of what consciousness is, perhaps. Inform my understanding. Anyway. So what I have in mind is something that looks like, that photo that you've seen of a water drop. And it drops into the water, and there's the drop submerges, and then there's the ripples. But because of the size of the drop or something, the water kind of erupts another bubble above the surface. That's kind of what I imagine consciousness to be. Or mind, small mind. And it's like a little bubble. And it reflects. And we often think that that thing, what's reflected in there, is reality, but it's not, it's just a reflection. So we're looking at the surface of this kind of bubble of water. But gosh, look, isn't that amazing? Gosh, look at the trees. But it's not, it's just a reflection. And we get attached to that bubble, even though it's obviously temporary. And if you expand on this notion, I've played around with this notion. Instead of thinking about the surface being on the water, kind of below us, gravity, think about it as being a vertical surface that's going through time. So you've got this kind of plane, kind of like a wave. It's kind of, and it's going through time. And for some reason, there is this bubble holding itself like a standing wave in front of this plane going forwards in time. For some reason, I've had that in my head quite a lot. And of course, there's lots of these little bubbles in front of the surface of this thing moving forward. And so although kind of like mind, the small mind, human consciousness is quite remarkable, because it has the self-reflective kind of quality, it's actually the bit to settle back and realize that there's this huge plane going forwards in time, this continuous phase space thing, that phase time thing that we all participate in. So although you're looking at this now, obviously somewhere else, doing something else. And there are people on this planet doing stuff and thinking things all right now. And that's kind of more like the plane surface. And animals and everything, cats and dogs and, sorry about that. Cats and dogs and whales. And they're all just doing whatever it is that they're doing. Plants and trees and the whole Gaia thing. The whole life thing is kind of like that surface moving forward. Then again, you might even think about planets and stuff. They're all rotating away and so on and so forth. They're kind of at the same time. I don't know when it comes to inanimate objects. Inanimate. But that's kind of what I imagine. And I can imagine that we get associated with these little bit that's us kind of thing. That's me, that little bubble. And it is, a remarkable thing. I mean, this kind of like this little sphere is just like amazing. But actually, if you just settle back into this wave, now that's astounding. Surely, that's astounding. So it's not really to be so concerned about what the mind produces and how interesting that might be. It's actually to settle back It's not to look at the reflection of this, the models of this in the bubble. All right, go, God, look at this amazing surface of life, and isn't that amazing? And almost making it mystical, but that's just a reflection in the mind. To actually settle back in one's own existence and actually be part of this wave, which we're part of. Home. So, for what it's worth. Right. So, do you think we can conduct a few more kind of like experiments where people can meditate on these things slightly more precisely so that one can feel more at home, perhaps?